There we go. I think that coming in not as a threat, but as a friend really allows you to set up this like mutual cooperative relationship where they don't feel like you're coming in as like a grown-up who's in charge, because you can get a lot of resistance and you can also get a lot of separation anxiety with that. So the more that you can have them be in charge of their home and you be their guest, the better, the more cooperative you'll be. And then if you make a plan about how you're going to spend your time with them, then it's very clear to them like what's happening and when their parent's going to be home. I don't like it when parents sneak out, because I feel like that only reinforces the anxiety that a child may feel about like having you there. I know some parents do it so it like alleviates the stress of like the big moment where they walk out and their child freaks out. But I think that if a parent's willing to do it with you without that, it really helps the child learn the skills that they need to learn to feel comfortable with having caregivers. And that's what these families want. Like, they're actively hiring people because they want their kids to be comfortable with caregivers. So I think that coming in very friendly, coming in with a cooperative attitude, and being very sensitive to a child's emotional state really, really helps that separation process, and creating some sort of like ritual around it where it's fun. Like, we're going to go, let's go make something for them so when they come back they're so surprised, like, let's go sneak off. And like, so even having the child sneak off with you, or saying like, oh, let's go like wave them down the street, or let's go, you know, play hide and seek and like run off and go do something. Like, if you can kind of get into this space where you're like doing like a secret special thing with them that doesn't like ignore the fact the parent's leaving, but kind of invites them into like this little fun world with you, I think really, really helps the separation process. And I always be honest with kids. I never want them to feel like they can't trust me. So I don't ever like try to sugarcoat what's happening, but I try to give them good coping skills. So yes, it's so tricky when people leave that we don't want them to leave, and it can feel very sad. I understand that feeling. That makes sense. I feel so sad when my mom leaves and I don't want her to go. So validating any sort of sad feelings. Of course, at a certain developmental stage, distraction is very helpful. But I think even from the beginning, and if a child's not verbal, not trying to distract them to the point of like ignoring what they're trying to express, because separation anxiety is totally normal and healthy. Like, people should feel anxiety when they're left by their primary attachment people. So not trying to minimize it, but trying to acknowledge it and then be like, all right, how do we cope with these feelings? These feelings make sense. We should have them. It's all fine. And not being thrown by them. Like, because I think sometimes kids think that if they start to feel big feelings, they're going to be in trouble. Like, big feelings are bad. And especially in a separation anxiety like experience, we need to reinforce that this is not bad. Like, you are not making a scene because you're not acting appropriately. You're acting completely appropriately, and it's 100% fine. And I think that that helps the parents' anxiety reduce too, if they feel like you are fine with it and you're not getting flustered and you're not getting upset that they're upset. And I think sometimes kids are like, well, now my babysitter is going to be, you know, mad at me or weird with me because I don't want to be with them. I want to be with my parent. But if you can just reinforce like, oh my gosh, I see your body feels sad. That makes so much sense. I feel sad in these situations. Share a story about a time that you felt sad. That just creates an empathy bond immediately. I'll even make up stories if I can't think of something that's true, because it's so powerful for a kid to feel like you get them. So in any situation where a child is having a big feeling, whether that's like a discipline situation or they're just having a conflict within their child, immediately acknowledging the feeling, validating the feeling, and empathizing with the feeling will reduce the reaction that they're having so that you can make a plan with them about how to cope with it in a way that's going to be helpful to them and to you. Because I think where kids' feelings do get out of control is when they go unacknowledged and unempathized, whatever, the opposite of empathized. They're not empathized with, and that we just act like kids need to be able to like behave, but that's just not normal or human. And so I think that especially with a child that you don't know very well, you have to really show them that you care to understand what they're going through, because they just are experiencing a stranger and they have no idea how you're going to react to their feelings. But if you react in a way that's extremely comforting and non-shaming, they're going to immediately feel safe with you. And that's what you need, because kids who feel safe with their grown-ups cooperate with their grown-ups and take instruction from them and listen to them. But if they don't feel safe with you, they're going to completely act out of instinct. It's totally normal. So especially when you're having that separation process, right off the bat, that's your first chance to prove to them that you're a safe person. So you have to take that very seriously. And then once that's over, you make a plan with them for the day, because that will set you up for having good cooperation. Because people who don't have a plan with kids usually get into conflict with their kids, because their kids don't know what the boundaries are, they don't know what to expect, they don't know what's coming, so they're going to react negatively if you try to shift gears. They're going to push back, they're going to try to run the show. But if you can make an agreement with them, like right off the bat, then you're on the same page and you're on the same team right from the beginning. And that'll really, really set the tone for the entire day. And that's what you want, because it's very hard to read kids in situations that you don't know very well. But if you start the day like, we're a team, let's make our plan, and you build in all the things that they want to do in addition to the things that you need them to do, if it feels balanced, then it's going to feel like manageable for them. But if they don't have any concept of time or tasks or order of operations, they're going to push back on everything. So I try to even create some sort of visual plan, because I think that really, really helps you remind them of what you agreed to. At any age, I think it's very helpful. So you can kind of create like, okay, we're going to play. All right, what should we play specifically? What's something that you really want to show me? And then really get specific about everything that you're going to do. And it feels good for kids to feel like they know what's going to happen and how they can succeed and how they can please you, because kids want to please you. And if they don't have a clear plan about what that's going to look like, they're just going to act out. So the more that you can be like, this is our plan, we're going to track it. It feels good to check things off a list. It feels good to know where we're at. And especially for kids who do have separation anxiety, knowing when their parent's going to be home is really, really helpful for them. Even if it's that they're going to be home after they're already asleep, as long as it's part of the schedule, I think that it really helps them not to feel anxious about going to bed without their parent being there, because you've built this trust with them that like, yes, all this is going to happen, including you going to sleep and your parent coming home. Because I never want to underestimate how scary it is for a child to have no concept of time and have no control over what's going on. And it is pretty crazy how well kids cope a lot of the time without having any idea what's going on or what's going to happen. We just often don't think about like giving kids some sort of trajectory, because internally, like as adults, we already know what's going to happen. But a lot of times kids just have literally no idea like how long they're going to get to play, when we're going to leave, what's happening later that day, what's happening tomorrow. Like a lot of times that's not very well communicated. So if you can kind of contain your time with them, it'll feel a lot more manageable emotionally, because it is very hard to have a stranger take care of you. Like it just is. Biologically, we don't like the idea of strangers being in our homes. So we want to make it feel safe, and that's a really good way to do it. And then as things come up Make sure you check in with parents if you have questions or if it's not clear, because sometimes kids do try to push boundaries and you may not be sure what the actual plan is. And so don't hesitate to reach out to parents. I think it's much more a sign of experience when caregivers know to check, because I think sometimes people think like, oh, if I, ask them about this, they're going to think I don't know what I'm doing or I don't have good judgment. But I truly think it's the opposite. Like, the more that you are serious about making sure you know what the parent's preference is, the more experienced you're going to appear, because you're going to have the knowledge that like every parent's different. You want to respect what they want. And then always send updates throughout the time that you're there, pictures and videos, and especially like when they went to bed or if they had a really cute or funny moment. Because really, it is this weird job where the people that are hiring you are not witnessing your work at all. So you have to loop them in. You want the parent to feel like they had a sense of what was going on. You don't want to have them come home and feel like they had no clue what the day was like. The more that they can feel like they are in touch with you, the more comfortable they're going to be and the easier they're going to be to work for. So always make sure that you send them little updates. Don't, of course, like text them constantly, because they usually are busy. They're trying to, or like even they're out trying to have a date night and not be having their lives be centered around their kids and then getting all this stuff. So you can check in with them and say, hey, I'd love to send you updates. Like, how much do you want that? What does that look like for you? Because every parent, say like, if I'm bugging you, just let me know, because sometimes parents are like, this is like distracting, so moderate yourself. But I think that especially the first time you work for a family, when they don't know you, the more that you show them what you're doing and loop them in throughout the day, the more comfortable they're going to feel with you. And also feel free to do it to both parents. I think a lot of times you get into like a more of a relationship with one parent than the other, and the other parent kind of gets left out. And I think that's just sad. So, yeah. I mean, especially male parents oftentimes get left out of that, and that's just like a product of our patriarchy. So I think it's really important to loop them in. And of course you can say like, if you're busy and you don't want to get these throughout the day, just let me know. But I'm just going to put us on a group text. And it's not like one parent can make decisions better than another parent. I think that's also like a weird part of our culture, like where we think that like the one parent has more of a say. So I think just making it more of a collaborative process is better for everybody. So I think just starting like a group text with both parents right at the beginning of the day, and then making sure that you send little updates is fantastic. And I think really what your job is to give them a really good play date. You're not there to be a full-time nanny in the sense that you're not there to like run their household or do housework or anything like that. Like, you're really just there to spend time with their kids. And I think that that's why this job is like the best, because a lot of the sort of household expectations just aren't part of it. And so you really just get to focus on your relationship with the child. And that to me is the sign of a skilled caregiver, is how the child feels at the end of the day. Because kids bond very quickly and they sense if someone really cares and they really are engaged with them, and they sense when adults are not. And so the more that you can cultivate your relationship with them, the more the child's going to feel happy. And so that means like you definitely want to engage in creative play with them. You want to give them lots of opportunities to show you their things and teach you things about things they're into. It's just not that common that kids have adults that just give them undivided attention. Yeah. Even in a situation where they have a stay-at-home parent, because a lot of times like you're just constantly distracted. And even being in a classroom setting, the one-on-one time that you get is so limited. But this is like so special that they would have an adult just show up to like be with them. And so I think it's just a very powerful way that kids can get self-esteem and get a sense of feeling cared about in the world, because it really, really, on like just a basic human level, is very powerful when you have a stranger just show up and really care for you. And I think it just builds a lot of like security internally. And so I think that really your job is to create that meaningful development within their sense of self, that they are cared about and that they matter, and that people in the world think they're special. Like, having a stranger show up and treat them like they're the coolest kid ever is extremely powerful, because you have no idea how they're being treated in their home, in their family system, in their school. So having just like one person show up and be very invested in them is extremely meaningful. And I definitely know that like there are kids who need that. And maybe their parents aren't even aware of kind of what their individual needs are, but they may show that to you as a caregiver, because anyone that plays with a child is immediately kind of like someone to be trusted. So I just take that responsibility very seriously, and I really want caregivers not to feel like they're just kind of showing up just to babysit. Like, what you're doing is an extremely important thing. And so I want you to really focus on that. And I think the way that you can judge yourself is what you feel like that child's memory of that day is going to be. And I almost feel like it's like that movie Inside Out, where even like the smallest interaction or like doing some project together can really like be solidified as an important long-term memory. And so I try to think about that when I'm with kids, is like, how can we make this like a really special memory, whatever we do today? Because you have so much freedom in that time to do whatever you want. Like, you could like teach them how to bake a pizza from scratch, or you could build some crazy fort, or like spend hours making this like Lego tower. And even just doing very simple things like that, where you like really, really invest your time in making something together, or learning something together, or working on something, even if it's like working through a conflict and coming up with like a really good solution, or helping them handle a really hard moment, that's a very important long-term memory. So it doesn't even have to be like, oh, we had this magical Mary Poppins day. It could be like, I was really having a hard time with my homework and I was really frustrated. And then my caregiver like took me outside and we sat on a blanket and we worked on our homework outside, and like I was able to calm my body down and we got it all done, and then we played soccer. Like, having a caregiver help you go from like being in a negative place to being in a positive place, like that's a super powerful experience. So I just think when you're there, make sure you come into it with your whole heart, and that you really are intentional about what you do with your time with them. We definitely don't do screen time, and we don't want to just be like a detached supervisor. We want to be actively engaging in the play and the learning and kind of guiding them through what's happening. I don't think that adults should act as judges with kids, especially when they're having interpersonal conflicts, because everything is a teaching moment. You want to help them navigate their difficulties so that they can know how to do it on their own. I don't like when adults decide who's right and who's wrong, or this, okay, if you can't play nice, we're just going to take this away. That completely eliminates the whole learning process that you just had the opportunity to do. So I think especially with discipline situations, it's usually not a case where there needs to be discipline. It's usually a case where they need to have a teaching moment. So if that's like they are having conflict over what they're playing with, and one child got angry and got aggressive and hit the other child, I would never put that child in timeout, because that completely takes them out of the situation. They may resist you. They're going to be angry and isolated, and it doesn't actually help them resolve what happened. So instead of reacting if a child does something I don't want them to do, I try to stop and acknowledge like why they feel the way they do before we make any decisions about what the solution is. So this was something I never had done to me as a child, and I definitely in my early caregiving years, like, we're just doing the authoritarian parent thing that I was raised with, and I would just put kids in timeouts or threaten them that we're going to take things away, or reprimand them. And I just learned over time like how ineffective that is and how it doesn't really help kids change behavior, because then they just feel shame or anger towards you. But if you can respond empathetically and compassionately, it completely reinforces their trust in you and their desire to learn from you. So an example I give is like these two brothers I was working with, and I saw out of the corner of my eye that the younger one was like gonna sock the other one in the face. And I saw it quick enough that I was able to grab his hand to stop him. And I would have just immediately launched into like, we do not hit, that kind of stuff. But now my approach is I just immediately dropped to my knees to get on his level, and I looked at him in the eyes and I said, your body looks so angry. It does not feel good to be angry. I'm really sorry that you have big angry feelings in your body. Would you like me to give you a hug to help you with your feelings? And of course, immediately he just starts crying and he's like, yeah. So I just hugged him and held him, and I said, oh, it's so hard when we feel so angry. I know that feeling. Sometimes I feel so angry in my body too, and I just want to hit somebody because it's really, really hard to control angry feelings. And that completely changes the whole dynamic. And then we can talk about, tell me about your angry feelings. It's really, really common that kids act out when their feelings are hurt. And so if you immediately respond to the child who's acting out, you're completely ignoring what's causing it. And that only helps them to push down those feelings, and they keep acting out. So you don't want to just react to the child who did like the big negative thing, because usually they're the ones that are actually hurt emotionally. So instead we can talk about like, tell me about your angry feeling. Okay, where did that come from? You feeling frustrated, you feel left out, you're not being listened to. In that case, his big brother was just not listening to him, but his brother was also trying to like give him good instruction. So it wasn't like you're right, you're wrong. It was like, oh, okay, so you don't feel listened to. I get that feeling. All right, well, let's find out why he was not listening to you. And then we can have a dialogue back and forth. And then I always tell kids, okay, what instructions do you want to give each other? So that they can actually ask for what they need from the other person. I feel like this is only something I learned in therapy like so much later in my life, which I wish I would have learned as a kid. So really what you want is you want the child who had their feelings hurt to say, I need you to listen to me. I have an idea about how I want to play, and I don't feel like you are hearing my idea. Can you listen to my idea? And then the other kid can say like, I'm already playing with something. I need space. I don't want to play together right now. Okay, so that's what you want. That's what you want. What can we do together? And then we open a brainstorming session. And I really like it when the kids brainstorm together, because then it's like, then they're on the same team. They're not adversaries anymore. They're collaborating on a plan, and I'm like cheering them on. I'm like, oh, I like your idea. Okay, well, that maybe not work. How about like, and then we just kind of get them into like this different mode of communicating where they're coming up with solutions for their own conflicts, and you're not just coming in as the adult that's telling them what to do, because that just doesn't help them long term at all, and it will just create more situations just like this. So the more that you can just like come alongside as like a life coach, the more you're going to be able to handle things in a quick and efficient way that's going to teach them what they need to know to be able to handle their feelings in life outside of their home environment. Because home is really an important space where kids have to feel like they can mess up. Like, if there's anywhere where a child needs to be able to have a tantrum, needs to be able to hit somebody, needs to be able to break something or break a rule, it has to be home. Because if you don't feel like you can screw up at home and still be safe and cared for and have somebody like help you deal with the shame and the anger and the frustration, how in the world are you going to do that out in public? So I just don't think that kids should be expected to be well behaved at home. I just don't. I think that's where the space where you have to be able to just be you however you are and have that be completely fine. And I feel like sometimes that gets messed up with caregivers because it feels like now home is this place where I have to be on my best behavior or I'm going to be in trouble. My parents are going to come home and be mad. So you just don't want home to feel that way. And I just don't like to ever threaten kids that like, I'm going to tell your parent, or what would your mom think if she knew you did this, because that violates your trust with them. And it also delays the discipline, which really creates a lot of anxiety. And it also disrupts the learning because kids don't associate behaviors with consequences unless they're like immediately connected. So whenever I give a consequence for a behavior, because sometimes those situations arise, it has to be right away and it has to be a natural consequence is what I call it. So it can't be like, if you don't sit and eat dinner, you're not going to get iPad time tonight. Those things are totally disconnected and they don't make sense. So I never want to create this consequence that's like something that's not connected to the situation, or that's like something the parent has to do when they get home, because that sucks for the parent too, to come home and be like, oh, they lost this or whatever. You want to deal with everything in a very contained and quick manner and have everything but be proportional. I think that sometimes people just get into this space where they just threaten kids to try to manipulate their behavior, and so they try to create these like potential consequences that would feel so severe that a child will like behave in the moment. And that just doesn't feel fair. Like, that feels emotionally manipulative to me. So if it's like, oh, we have to finish dinner before we go play. If you choose not to eat, then we're not going to get to play after dinner because we're not going to have time. So if you explain things in a way that like is logical and like, oh, cause and effect, like if everything feels connected, I feel like then kids have a much more calm reaction and can follow along better. And then I always frame everything as a choice, because you never want to make a child feel like they're bad or that their character is being called into question. You always want to give them the opportunity to make choices of their own free will, because truly you can't force anyone to do anything. And you don't want to get into power struggles. So the more that you can just present options in a very neutral way, the more they're going to comply. So even if it's like, oh, it's bedtime, and they're like resisting bedtime, you can say, oh, well, you can choose. It's up to you. You can brush your teeth first, or you can put your pajamas on. Which would you prefer to do? Then their brain immediately switches from, I don't want to do this, to, oh, what do I want to do? Kids don't get a lot of choices in life, which sucks for them. So just by offering them a choice in a very friendly way that's neutral, they're going to immediately be like, oh, I have the power. Great. Because that's all they want. They want to be in control. So you've totally given them total control of the situation in a contained way. So you can sidestep so many landmines of conflicts when you just present everything as a choice. Oh, would you prefer to eat your carrots first or your burger? Which would you prefer? I wonder how fast you can eat your carrots. I'm going to guess that you can eat them in 15 minutes. I'm going to set the timer and see if you can beat me. So always make everything like this invitation to engage and not a power struggle. Even if you make something creative, like, oh my gosh, have you ever thought about what it would be like to get ready for bed if you lived on the moon? There would be no gravity and you'd be floating around. Let's pretend like we're on the moon and we're getting ready for bed. What happens if we squirt our toothpaste and it flies away? And now you've created this whole fantasy world where they're like in their imagination and they're not in a power struggle with you. So you can completely manipulate situations to have kids comply, even if they're naturally resistant, just by giving them choices and by giving them creative ways of doing things. So I think as much as you can employ strategies like this, the better, because you do not want to discipline kids in this job. That is not your job description. And it also is just really hard to do with kids you don't know very well. You have to be able to enforce boundaries and keep things moving, but you need to do it in a way that is mindful of avoiding conflict as much as possible. So even if you do need to present something as a consequence, you do it quickly and it's over and you move on. You don't want to dwell, you don't want to let things build up. And then you always want to check in with the parent if there is a situation that happened, just so that they're aware of how you handled it, and ask them for any feedback next time. Because maybe you had to make a judgment call, and maybe they would have preferred you to do something different. It wasn't possible for you to, like, in that moment text the parent and be like, hey, what do you want me to do? You don't want to make the parent feel bad about their child, so you just want to present it as like, hey, we had this tricky situation, we had a little bit of a hard time about this, they were feeling this way. So the way that you talk about it, the language you use is really important, because you want to invite parents to give you feedback and not just report to them what happened. You never want to not be transparent about kids' behavior, because of course every parent needs to know, but you want to say it in a way that's really respectful and that, you know, allows them to give their input, because it is really important that parents feel comfortable having you handle their kids' behavior and that you are open to their feedback about it. And I think immediately when you ask people for feedback, they immediately feel comfortable with you. I think it's where caregivers are like, you know, very overconfident in their approach that parents will feel resistant, even if you handled it well. So at the end of the day, you're just going to check in with them, talk a little bit, go over everything, give them a good review of everything. It's really important that parents know like exactly what happened, even if things didn't go according to plan, because they just need to know what they're walking into. So if you had a really hard time getting them down for a nap, that's understandable. Sometimes kids just have an off day, or you're a new person, so they're just not gonna be able to do it. That's fine. You don't have to feel bad. You did everything you could, but make sure you tell a parent, because if a parent doesn't know and then something doesn't go like it normally does, they're gonna feel weird and suspicious. So even if like it was a hard day, even if the kids did act out, make sure that you just check in with the parent and say, you know, we did the best we could. Like, this was fun. This was a little tricky. How would you, you know, what feedback would you have for me for next time? But I really enjoyed it. And just always end it on a really positive note. If there is ever a safety situation, however, you need to call the parent immediately. We never wait to report any safety situation. Always overreact. Never underreact, because you don't know how a parent's going to feel. Some parents are very relaxed about things. Some parents are not. And so always erring on the side of overreacting is very important. If you don't get a hold of the parent, call the other parent. Don't just wait till they get home. Thoroughly document everything. Take photos of anything that happens. Immediately write down what happened too, with every detail that you can remember. Because a lot of times parents will just take their kids to the emergency room if they fall or hit their heads, just because they weren't there and they didn't see it. So you need to be conscious that they're gonna potentially just take their kid right in if they got hurt in any way. Even if you saw it and you feel comfortable that they're okay, just the fact that the parent wasn't there to witness it, they will probably take them in. So the more that you can document it to provide them with that to give to the doctor, the more they're going to feel okay about what happened. And if you ever feel like you need to call 911, you do not need a parent's permission for that ever. You just call. That's not something that you need to ask permission for. If you can call from the landline, do, because then they can find the house immediately. Sometimes with cell service, it's harder for them to identify where you are, and of course, you're probably not going to remember their address off the top of your head. So just be very cognizant of anything that could potentially be a safety issue. Most homes, of course, are going to be pretty kid-proof, but some families just aren't as, like, on it with that stuff. Just never leave kids unattended, because the worst is if you don't see it. Sometimes those things happen, of course, like you can't always have your eyes on them, but as much as you can, make sure that you are aware of where they are, what they're doing. Never leave kids unattended in any situation, because if you don't see what happens, it could be so much worse than you know. And especially with babies, like if you have to use the restroom or something like that, always make sure you either bring them with you. You can set them in the bathtub. They're totally going to be safe in there. Put them in a high chair. Make sure they don't have food. Put them in their crib. Wherever you need to put them, even if they freak out because you're leaving them, if they're in a safe place, that's fine. Be very careful about changing tables. Don't ever walk away from a child. We did have a situation where a caregiver took a few steps back to grab clothes, and the baby just flipped right off. And she like caught her, but she hit the side of her face on the dresser. So just be super careful, because you just never know, especially with rolling and stuff like that. Never just set a baby down on a surface and expect that they're not going to roll off. Most families do have cameras in their home just for baby monitors and alarm systems. So don't be surprised if a family has video of anything that happens. That's just really common. And don't be weirded out by it. I mean, most jobs that you would have, you're going to be filmed wherever you work. So I don't think it's something to be paranoid. Yeah. And then with a child that's sick, if a child gets sick when you're there, notify the parent right away. That honestly doesn't happen that often. Like, I can't even think of the last time that's happened. But what does happen is parents will request care when their kids are sick if they don't want to send them to school or daycare, or they can't because they're still contagious. So make sure that you're comfortable with that. I will always include in the booking notes if there's sickness, and the parent has to give us their symptoms so you can decide if you're comfortable with it. Because sometimes it's like they have a cough or a cold, and then sometimes it's like they have a fever. So there are certain things that we just don't do, because I don't want you catching something or taking it to some other home. But we do get plenty of requests for sick kids. So just make sure you're comfortable with whatever they ask for, and make sure that if the parent asks you to give them any type of medication, that you get it in writing, that you have permission, and that you document what time and what dose, so everything is documented. We do have kids, of course, who have dietary things, so make sure that you're mindful of that, and never share your food with the kids, because we did have a situation where a child was vegan, and the caregiver, she was an older woman, so I just think she didn't really know what that was, and she had brought her own like cheese crackers, and so it was like processed cheese. So the little girl got sick that night, and we don't know if it was really because of that, but she was like, oh yeah, I had her cracker, so I think maybe she hadn't had dairy before. I'm not sure, but just be cautious with that, because you don't want to bring in anything. You're of course welcome to bring your own food if you want to, especially like I have a caregiver who she's vegan. So when she sends her welcome email to the family, she always says like, hey, I'm vegan, so if you need me to bring something else, I can bring my own food. Because it's definitely the expectation that you eat what the kids have and what they have. You don't have to like prepare your own meal. But I mean, if you want to bring something on your own, that's fine. And then of course, never like buy the kids food or treats and stuff when you're out. Sometimes it's okay, you can check with the parent, but I just don't like that to be like an expectation. And give them only like what the parent says, and don't like give them thousands of treats. But I think that, most of the time people are just used to having what the family has. What else was I going to say about that? Oh, that will be in their family profile. So you know if a child has like a severe allergy or something like that. And then the one other thing kind of on a policy level is just with your own cell phone, we are really intentional about not being on our phones when we're working with the family. We, of course, will use our phones because we're going to take pictures and be communicating with parents, but we do get feedback if you're on your phone, because kids know to report that to their parents. That's like the number one thing that they know. So if you are on your phone, it'll probably get reported. I usually give one warning, and then otherwise I just stop working with somebody, because that just so goes against what I want kids to receive. Make sure that you don't let kids play on your phone. I know that's really common. Kids are used to adults just handing them their phones. But just as a precaution, I just never want a child to see even like photos of you and your boyfriend, like, just personal stuff. And I don't want them to like play games on your phone or go on YouTube or anything like that. So just keep that totally off limits. The only other thing I use my phone for is music to play, when we're hanging out and stuff like that. I like to do that. But other than that, do not be on your cell phone. And I'll let you know, like with all feedback, if I get feedback like that. So for most things that aren't safety related, I'll give a warning and provide coaching. But if I get negative feedback more than once, we usually just stop working with the caregiver. Safety things, though, are one time and done. We do not work with caregivers who have any sort of safety reports. If you, for your own safety, need to be walked to your car at night, please feel free to ask the parents that, because even though I feel totally comfortable in all the neighborhoods we work in, I just don't think that crime is based off of the neighborhood you live in. So if you want to be walked to your car, just ask the parent to do that, and that's totally fine. And then with photos, because you are going to take them and send them to parents, I think I only have one or two families who specifically requested that caregivers not do that, because they just don't want even photos of their kids on a caregiver's phone, especially someone they don't know well. But that is specified in their family profile, so you would know that ahead of time. But be very mindful that you are not to post any photos of the kids on your social media because of privacy. And then also just overall confidentiality, that's in your contract. We're very careful with that. We never want a family to feel like their information isn't private. We do have a couple families who are like in the entertainment industry and stuff like that. So there are people that's more important. But just in general, we want to make sure that families don't feel like their personal information, even stuff that you like would see or hear or whatever. Most of our families are connected because we don't advertise at all, so they know each other. And we've definitely had one situation where a caregiver canceled on a family because she was in a car accident, and then worked for another family the night after and didn't realize they knew each other, and like her car was totally fine. Like it was like a minor thing. And so it totally got back to the other family that they were like, she kind of put us in a lurch. Like we thought she made it seem like it was really serious, and it wasn't. So just be careful, even when you're talking about families you work for, because comparing kids is a dangerous thing to do. And it definitely can happen if you feel like you're just, telling families like, oh yeah, I work for another family and, their kid, da-da-da. It just instills a certain sense of insecurity that you would be talking about them to other families. So just be careful with that. With driving in general, usually for freelance jobs, parents are not going to have you drive because they are not going to feel comfortable with that. Every once in a while we get those kinds of requests, and if we do, I'll put the car emoji in the request so you know that the family is asking for someone who can drive. And typically the way that we handle that is that you would go meet them beforehand to know the kids and to get the instructions and to get any car seats or boosters that need. It's super rare, but it does happen. But we would never, of course, just have you go somewhere and pick up some kids. Like, we would never allow that. Parents have to provide the car seats and install them for you because every car seat's different. I don't want you installing a car seat that you're not familiar with. And then you would track the miles that you drive for reimbursement. So you will always get mileage reimbursement for any distance that you drive with the kids in your car. Some parents will have you drive their vehicle if you're comfortable. It's definitely fun and fine to go out and about with kids if you're comfortable with that and parents want you to. But it's totally up to you. Like sometimes caregivers are like, oh yeah, I'll take them to the park, no problem. And sometimes it just doesn't feel good. So typically you're going to be just home with the kids, but every once in a while a parent will be like, oh, would you mind, this? I definitely want that to be a conversation before you show up. I don't want you to get there and then them be like, oh, can you take them somewhere? And you're like, oh. I mean, most caregivers are comfortable, but if you're not, just make sure that you're careful about checking in with parents about that. And of course, never take the kids somewhere without the parents' permission. Never introduce them to anybody that you know. We only had one situation with this where a caregiver, she was with this family like full time, but she took them like way out of the way to a Starbucks that her friend worked at because I think she got like a free drink or something. And it was like definitely the expectation the parents wanted the kids out every day. Like she took them on an outing every morning before naps. But it was like why would you drive all the way to another city to go to Starbucks? Like, yeah, going to Starbucks may be a fun activity that parents are fine with you doing, but it was just totally not appropriate. And of course the kids were like, oh, we met their friend. And it was just like, of course made the parents feel weird, Yeah. So just be careful with that. Of course you may happen to run into somebody that you know, but you don't want to ever create those situations. So be careful. And always just check in with them about where you are in case of an emergency. We did have an incident years ago where a caregiver left kids in the car when she was doing an errand for a family that they asked her to do, and she didn't want to take them in, and she left them in the car with the windows down where she could see them, but that's still illegal and the police were called. So please be super careful, never ever to leave a child in a car unattended. It is illegal. It doesn't matter if the windows are down, if you can see them, someone can call the police and it can be a very serious situation. The kids weren't harmed, but still it was like extremely serious situation. So be very, very careful with that, especially if you're doing school like drop-offs and pickups. And I also was told recently that a family that I don't know, it was a friend of one of our families, their little baby died because they were taking a nap in the car and like their head was down and they didn't have enough airway. And I guess it can happen, like if the car seat isn't installed properly or whatever. It was just like, oh my God, I just can't even imagine how tragic. Because the child was not left in the car. The babysitter was in the car with them and the child was just napping. So we've just decided as a policy that we will not allow kids to nap in the car just because it could really be dangerous. I had never been told that before. So I was just like so shocked. So please be careful. Like sometimes parents are like, oh, they can, if they fall asleep in the car, it's fine. Or parents will let their kids sleep in the car. But now we just say like, no, we can absolutely not do that. Kids have to sleep at home. So just be careful about that. I had never heard anything like that before. And I was just like totally shocked. So just with all safety things, make sure you're always hyper vigilant, always document everything, always communicate everything to families immediately. Do not wait till they get home. Make sure that you overreact to every situation and never hesitate to call 911 if you need to. With general housekeeping stuff, like I said, I don't expect you to do cleaning. Sometimes parents will ask you to like fold a load of the kids' laundries if the kids are asleep, because sometimes kids will take like super long naps. Just make yourself helpful. You don't want to just check out the second the kids go to sleep. Just make sure the house is always tidy when the parents come so that it's just better than how you received it. Make sure that you're helping the kids stay on top of their stuff throughout the day. And then we ask that you always do the dishes because I think that really, really makes parents feel like you went above and beyond. So always leave the sink empty and the house better than you got it. Of course, some households are going to be like way crazier than others, and you could never like Mary Poppins it. But as long as it's at least a little bit better than what you got it, then I think you've done your job. We definitely want you to be comfortable when you're working. Don't feel like you need to dress up, but I don't want it to feel like you're not at work. So make sure that you dress like you're going to a job and that you aren't just like going to work out. That's like one of my biggest things, is I never want families just to feel like caregivers are just showing up casually. Like, make sure you look professional. If you ever have a concern about a parent's rule or parenting style or anything about the household, please let us know immediately so that we can help you navigate that. Sometimes it's just an issue of the family not being a good fit for you because of the way that they do things, which is totally fine too. I never want you to feel like you can't be honest with me about your experience with a family. But if it's like a concern where you feel like this just isn't a good employer, we need to know that, because I don't want to keep sending caregivers to a family that isn't really a good environment to work in, whether that's just like the house being a disaster or there not being a good schedule or even just the parents' relationship being uncomfortable, whatever it may be. We haven't really had that many situations that would fall into that category, but I just never want you to feel like you couldn't tell me that. And also, if you just show up and you just don't feel right about it, just leave. I never want you to feel like you have to stick it out if it's something that's just off. Like I said, I've never had that happen, but I just always say that, like, go with your gut feeling. Like, you decide if you're comfortable. You always get to decide what families you work for, and I want you to always feel comfortable wherever you are. If you think a child is in danger or the child tells you something, we encourage you to report it. I feel like, you know, like I was saying earlier, you have this very privileged window into a child's world that maybe they don't have other adults that would even know or see things. And of course, just statistically, we know that there's a lot of things that kids experience that never gets detected. So if you ever feel like you need to report something, I want you to feel comfortable talking to us about it, and we can help you navigate that, because we've never had a situation like that before, but I just feel like it's something always to be mindful of, because you may be a safe person for that child, and it may be something that we need to do at some point. So I just want to make sure I always say that. It's, of course, like I said, always your decision who you work for, and we will support you in whatever you decide. But just be mindful about leaving families in the lurch, because sometimes it's not a good fit. You know, sometimes things don't work out, but we never want to just bail on a family. So please just be very transparent with us about your experience with families, especially more if you're working on a set schedule. We never want to just quit on families unless it's like a serious situation. So if you need help navigating something with a family, please let us know, because there are a lot of things that come up in these situations that are hard to deal with, and you may really need to have a conversation with the parent about what's going on. And we are absolutely happy to help you with that, because sometimes we get off to a rough start, or a parent may have unrealistic expectations, and we can totally help you communicate that and help the relationship work out, because a lot of times it's not really that you have an issue with the child, it's more maybe the parent, and we don't want you to like leave a child that you love or have that child lose you because something isn't working with the parent. So we want to address these things head on. So please give us feedback about your experience with the families. We check in with the families after you work with them, so we get their feedback about you, and I will always share that with you. They don't always respond, so if you don't hear anything, don't think it was bad. But sometimes they just don't respond. But I want you to know how you're doing so that you can grow and so that you can be aware of, you know, the quality of your work. And then at the same time, I want you to feel comfortable telling us if anything happens. We always try to give the families as much notice as possible if you do need to leave a job or if you need to cancel. Cancellations are pretty serious. We really, really pride ourselves on not canceling on families. So even if you've never worked for a family before and you're booked with them for like a random Saturday,
if you need to cancel on them, it really has to be because you're sick and you don't want to get the family sick and you can't work, or you have a legitimate emergency. But we very, very rarely rebook jobs. Once they're booked, they're booked. So it's just important to me that you feel able to manage your schedule, you don't overbook yourself, and that you keep every commitment that you have. So if for some reason you do need to cancel, we only do cancellations verbally. So you have to call them or leave them a voicemail. We don't text or email cancellations. I personally just feel like I don't believe people when they do it written. I just don't. So if they hear it in your voice, and if you are, confident enough to say it verbally, people are going to believe you, and it's going to be a much smoother process to cancel. If you do it over text or email, people usually are going to be pissed just because of human nature. So make sure you always call. If it's last minute, you need to make sure you call both parents and keep calling until you get them, because every minute is precious in those situations. You never want to screw a family over. And we have had that happen a couple times, and it's like awful. So make sure that you always let them know immediately. I had a caregiver a couple weeks ago who was booked with a family for all day Saturday, and then literally at Friday night, it was like midnight. And the only reason I was awake was because it was that crazy World Series game that went 18 innings. So I just happened to randomly be awake, and she texted me and said that she wasn't feeling well a few days before, that she'd been sick like on Wednesday, and she thought she'd feel better by Saturday, but she didn't, so she was going to have to cancel on the family. And I was just like, no. If you didn't feel well on Wednesday, if you're throwing up on Wednesday and you didn't bother to tell us, and then you're going to cancel on them at midnight the night before, like, just because you don't feel up to it, like, what are your symptoms, first of all, and why is this a situation that's happening right now?
So do we call you?
No.
Contact you before?
The family.
Okay.
Yeah. And then me. Yeah. So you need to contact the family. You need to tell them exactly what's going on, what your symptoms are. Because if you tell them your symptoms, usually they're going to feel like, oh, yeah, we don't want you to work. But if you're just like, I'm sick, that could mean 1,000 things. So make sure you call them. And then, of course, she backpedaled and was like, oh, no, I think I'm fine. Like, I'll be fine. And then she ended up working the whole day, and it was all fine. So it just felt to me like it wasn't fully honest.
Yeah.
So always call the family, explain the situation, and ask them if they want to back up. A lot of times they won't rebook if you cancel. So they need to figure out a different plan. So then if they want to rebook with one of our caregivers, then tell me, and then I will see if I can find somebody else to cover for you. If a caregiver cancels more than once, usually I stop working with them, because that's another thing where it's like, I think it's just a personality thing. Like, some people are totally fine with being late or canceling or whatever, and I just think sometimes those things are just hardwired into people, and I don't want to keep having the same issue with the same person. So yeah, those are the only reasons to cancel, and then let me know. That way I can take it off the calendar, and I won't, because, if you canceled on them and I don't know, I'll check in with them the next day and be like, how was it? And they'll be like, they canceled. And I'll be like, well, that's not okay. So we definitely want to avoid that. And then if a family needs to cancel on you, they have to give you 24 hours notice, because usually then I can rebook you for something else. I just don't want people like expecting to work a whole day and then lose it, So they have to give you 24 hours notice for and even just changes, like if they book 4 hours and all of a sudden they only want 2 hours, like they need to give you time. So make sure that, you let me know if a family cancels on you. If they don't give you 24 hours notice, they have to pay you at least, or they have to pay you the 2 hour minimum, so that you at least get paid for 2 hours, and then I will try to make those hours up to you by booking you for something else. So then they can just Venmo you for 2 hours of care, even if you didn't work at all, just because I think that's fair. And then we always ask them to give a start and end time, because I never want a family to say like, oh yeah, can you work at 4? Okay, well, are you asking me to work from 4 to 6 or 4 to midnight? Like, you need to be able to plan your life. So we always book a start and end time. If you have an issue with a family, like not being respectful of your time, please tell me, because I never want you to get screwed or to be taken advantage of. I mean, there's always a little bit of flexibility, because sometimes it's like they're just going out, they're not, and you know, you don't really care. You're like, whatever. But make sure that you let me know if that's a problem, because I don't want, you know, if you had something else going on, or that's like the worst. I remember when I would think like, oh yeah, I'll work Friday night, and then like my friend's having her birthday, I'll just show up at the end and then be like, oh, I missed it, you know, because I was expecting them to be home at 10 and they got home at midnight or whatever. So I just don't want you to be taken advantage of that way, because really the most important thing is that this job works well for you and that it fits into everything else that you're doing. So please just take good care of yourself. Caregiving is a lot of emotional work, and I just want to make sure you do your self-care to feel like you have the energy to give to it. I never want people just booking and feel like they can't say no. It's not the end of the world. We always say to each other, like, it's not the end of the world if we don't book every job. Like, it's more important to me that caregivers and families are good fits, and that it's like we should book it than that we like just get everyone's hours covered. If you work for a family and it's a fantastic fit and you love them and you want to work for them again, great. They're welcome to book with you directly, because then they can just ask you when you're free. And that's always my favorite way to book, is like when families just say like, we'd love to go on a date night. When's a good day for you? And I really encourage families to do that, because then you get to work with your favorite families and you get to set your own schedule. So I always encourage families to do that, because a lot of times families are flexible with when they book, and they really just want to work with the people that their kids love. So I encourage families to book with you directly. That's totally fine with me. You just have to add it to their schedule on BreezeWorks when you do. So when you go to their family profile, under the jobs tab, you just click on add new job, and then you'll just put it in, and that way they get a reminder and it's on your calendar. The only time we run into issues is when families book direct and you don't put it on the calendar, because then it's very easy to forget, or if we don't, because then it automatically sends the family a reminder. So sometimes families screw up and they forget or whatever. We just want to catch any potential miscommunications the day before. And if it's not on BreezeWorks, it's super easy for things to get messed up. So make sure that if a family does ask you directly, that you add it to the calendar, and that way we don't have, because what will usually actually happen in that situation is you'll get double booked. And we don't want that to happen to you. So it's totally fine if families book with you directly. Just make sure you put it on the calendar, and always feel like you can say no. I know sometimes that can be a hard thing. So if, like, I have some caregivers who've been with me for years, they work for so many families that it just is overwhelming to them when families ask, because they just have too many families asking them. So if you ever want to ask a family just to book through me and they can request you, that's fine too, because I know it's a lot easier to say no to me than it is to a family. So if a family asks you and you can't do it, please tell me, because then I can book them with somebody else. And families love that. Like if they text you and say, are you free Friday night? And you say no, and then an hour later, I'm like, hey, I have Nicole free. Do you want somebody else? They're like, oh my God, yeah, thank you. Like, they didn't even have to take the extra step to reach out to me. Families really appreciate that. So you can always just go that extra mile and ask them. If you work for families on your own and you want to refer them to us, that's great. That doesn't affect your relationship with them. So you can still charge them your own rate and book them separately. If they do also become a client of ours, then any caregiver I connect them with would be separate. But you're welcome to kind of do that too, because I know sometimes caregivers have lots of families that they work with as well, and they're always like, wait, which way, how do I, if I refer them or them now, you know. So I want to be clear that you're welcome to refer families to us, but then your relationship with them is separate. The way that our fee works is we just charge an hourly rate. So you get paid an hourly rate and we get paid an hourly rate. Families can book as little or as much care as they need. We don't have any other fees outside of that. So that way it's just purely based off of how much our service works for you. So families pay the company $5 an hour and they pay you $15 an hour. And that's for up to 3 children. Any additional children are $2 an hour extra to you. So then they would pay $22 an hour for 4 kids, $17 to you, to 5 to us. Our rate is always the same. So whether they're on a set schedule, freelance, whatever, It's always $5 an hour to the company and $15 an hour to you unless there's additional children. So their total then is $20 an hour, and then they'll just pay that to you directly. So when you get paid, usually families will pay you cash check, but then we also tell them that you're all on Venmo. So sometimes that's just the easiest for everybody. So they can pay you that way. And then once you've been paid, you'll transfer us our fee. That way families only have to make one payment. So then after you've received the payment from the family, you'll go on to Venmo, and then you will send us the fee for that job. So send it one by one, because I check them off the calendar as they come in. And make sure you put the last name of the family and the date that you worked. So if you worked for the Anderson family on November 9th for 4 hours, you'll just put Anderson 11-9, and then you'll Venmo us for $20 for 4 hours. So that's how we keep track. I give you 3 business days to transfer the funds, because if you're depositing checks or cash or whatever, sometimes, of course, there's a delay. And then I'll just check in with you if I haven't received it. So just however many hours you work, we round to 15 minutes. So that makes the math easy with $20. You can easily charge people for 15-minute increments. Like I said earlier, 2-hour minimum. So even if you work for a family for an hour, they still need to pay you for 2 to make it worth your time. Anything additional, like driving, where you're going to get mileage reimbursement, that's just direct to you. Sometimes families will pay extra just as like a tip. That's all yours. You get to keep that. It's just $5 an hour to the company for each hour that you work. Are there any questions about Venmo? Okay, I think most people have used it, so they're pretty comfortable with it at this point. Yeah, when we first started using it, people were like, what is that? No one knew what it was. It was like very new at that time.
I used to get, like, when I nannied consistently, like every day after school for a week, she'd be paying me like over $100 in cash every week, and then I was like, have you ever heard of Venmo? And
Yeah.
she like loves it. She's like, this is the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
Yeah, no, now people really like to use it.
Yeah.
And that way, too, you can charge families. Sometimes, like, if a family forgets to pay you, you can just charge them on Venmo. If you're working for a family consistently where you're making more money, then you have to be put on a payroll. So there is an IRS threshold where if a family's paying you more than a couple $1,000s, they have to report it. So make sure that if you're doing a position on a set schedule, usually that's where it would occur, or you're just working for a family a ton, you need to have that conversation with them about how they want to handle taxes. You're not employed by the company. We're a referral service, and we get paid by the families for our work. So you are the family's employee, so you need to decide with them if you're going to be paid cash or if you're going to be paid on a payroll. Because if you get to the end of the year and the family wants to report your income, they can't do it retroactively. They have to do it on a payroll system as you go and have taxes taken out as the employer. The major distinction that you need to be aware of for your own rights is that you cannot be treated as an independent contractor. Childcare work is not considered being self-employed. So if a family wants to pay you on the books, they have to do it as a payroll where you have taxes taken out and then you get a W-2 at the end of the year. The reason is because if you're self-employed, you pay taxes at a higher rate because you're the employee and the employer. But if you're employed by a company or a person, then you're paying taxes at a lower rate and your employer is paying their portion. So you basically, they pay part of your taxes and you pay part of your taxes. But if you're self-employed, you're paying for all of it. So you don't want to get into a situation where you're being taxed at a higher rate. So make sure that you have that conversation with them up front, because a lot of times families just don't think about it and they get to the end of the year and they're like, oh, we paid our nanny $5,000 this year. I want to write that off. But if they've only paid you cash, then they haven't done it correctly. And you don't want to then get a 1099 and then have to report it as self-employed income. So make sure you initiate that conversation with a family that you think that could be a situation, because it can get very awkward and it's very, yucky to have to deal with like money stuff like that after the fact. Families are often like encouraged by their accountants to just ask their their childcare people to give them their address and social security number, that's to file a 1099, which they're not allowed to do. So some people totally try to bend the law around it, but it's really actually not a gray area. It's very clear, like you can't do that to your caregiver. If they do need to be on a payroll, we have a payroll company that we partner with, so we can process the company fee and your rate together and still have them only make one payment. So we can totally do it fine on a payroll, but we just need to set it up that way. So just make sure you're mindful of that. Usually for freelance work, you're just working for a bunch of different families and you're not going to reach the threshold with anybody, so it's totally up to you to report your taxes however you choose to. Are there any other questions about that? Okay, great. All right, I think we covered it all. Are there any other things that you wanted to check in about before we wrap up?
So when we, if we need to contact you about something, do you want us to email you or text you or?
Oh, that's a really good question. So if it's during the day, regular business hours, I usually work 9:30 to 5:30. You can text me. We try to do all the scheduling communication over Crew, but if it's something unrelated to a booking, you can just text me. If it's after hours, then email me, because if you text me, I'm going to check it to make sure it's not urgent, and if I read it and it's not urgent, I'm not going to reply, but it could very easily get buried in my text messages once it's been read. But on email, I can star things, and then I know to come back to it the next day. So if it's the weekend or it's after hours and it's not urgent, just email me, that way it doesn't get lost. But yeah, you're welcome to text me about anything that's unrelated to scheduling, and then scheduling stuff we all try to do through the app as much as possible. Sometimes I forget and text, but we try to keep it separate. But yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. That's how we do it.
So anytime after around 5:30, you want to?
Yeah, sometimes I work a little late. So sometimes I'm contacting you.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll get a flood of booking requests in the evening. I try to stop checking just so I don't even know, because I tell families that I don't do booking requests that late. But sometimes families will be in a total pinch and they'll text me at 7 or 8 at night, and if I'm not doing anything, then I'll be sure, I'll throw it on the schedule and see if anyone wants it. Because I get too that a lot of times caregivers are working or they're at school during the day, so they start responding to stuff in the evening. So it kind of depends on the day, but if I reach out to you, then obviously I'm still working and you can respond to me. But yeah, that's typically how we do things, unless it's very urgent. Sometimes we'll have requests like that, and we try to help families in those situations if we can. All right, anything else? Okay, cool. I think that you guys